Thousands came out in dozens of cities across the country for protests dubbed by organizers as the 1 Million March for Children, demonstrating against the ways gender identity and sexual orientation are taught in Canadian schools.
It's about saying what is age appropriate and who ultimately can be the arbiters of that discussion. We believe that it's parents. Parents should be the ones who have the final say over what their kids are taught.
One contentious issue, the right of students to identify by the pronoun of their choice without parental consent.
We must be able to control how we raise them, what kind of values they retain, and for parents to not have a say in the conversation is not going to work out.
They don't have the maturity to decide to drink or to have guns or to vote. How the hell they have the right to change their sex without even the knowledge of their parents?
Protect trans kids!
In some cities, protests were matched by vocal counter-protests.
I see a mix of absolute hatred and bigotry. I also see a collection of people who are just scared and want the best for their kids and are afraid.
We felt it was important that people congregated here to make people know, and especially queer and trans kids and racialized kids know, that there are people here who have their back.
Things boiled over at some events. In Toronto, dozens of police officers kept the sides apart. In Ottawa, there were a number of arrests. And in Victoria, police ordered the crowds around the legislature to disperse. The issue of pronoun or gender identification differs by province and school board. For example, at the Toronto District School Board, Canada's largest, schools can inform parents of a student making a pronoun change only with that student's consent.
Kids need to grow up in a safe place, have parents that support them. But that doesn't mean forcing them to be outed or forcing them to feel uncomfortable in a situation they're not comfortable with.
In New Brunswick and Saskatchewan, parental consent for using a student's preferred pronoun is required for those under 16. New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs doubled down on that policy today.
The situation's pretty straightforward. It's quite amazing that there's even a discussion of what the role of parents should be with their kids' lives.
The Prime Minister was among the politicians and school boards that affirmed their support for the LGBTQ community as the clash over rights played out across the country. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
This is a good time to bring in our education reporter, Deanna Sumanac-Johnson. So, Deanna, what is being taught in classrooms?
Adrienne, it's really complicated and it really depends on where you live. Basically, different provinces mention sexual orientation and gender identity in different grades and under different subjects. So, for example, Ontario, the first mention of sexual orientation is in grade 5 in the curriculum. Sexual orientation and gender identity, of course, two separate subjects, are again brought up in grade 8. Ontario parents also have the right to opt their students out of sex ed classes, which these things fall under. Now let's go to Saskatchewan. In Saskatchewan, awareness of same-sex families is one of the expected educational outcomes under grade 3 health education. Now, having said all that, curriculum in Canada is not prescriptive. Teachers have a lot of autonomy and independence. So what your child is hearing in class, the language, the context, will largely depend on the individual educator and the kind of resources that that teacher uses. Many of those resources are suggested and approved by the boards and ministries of education, but some of them are third party as well. So again, a very complicated answer.
Okay. So if you're a parent and if you're curious or you're concerned, what do you do?
The best thing is always to talk to the teacher. That's always the first best point of reference. Some teachers these days, especially for sort of older elementary grades, will put up their units of study online so you can kind of follow along to what your student is learning, perhaps help them with their homework. But if your teacher does not use online modules, you can always talk to them in person. And I think principals are, if you're not happy or satisfied with the answer, you can go to the principal as well or to the school board.
Deanna, thank you.
You're welcome.